Hello, everyone. I'm going to say good day, depending on where you're at. It could be morning or afternoon, and appreciate you making time to participate in an informational webinar about the Career Award for Medical Scientists. We are going to go ahead and get started right on time so that we can be mindful of everyone's time, and this will be recorded so that people can come back and catch any bits that they missed. So welcome. My name is Paige Cooper Byas, and I am the program officer for the Career Awards for Medical Scientists, and would like to welcome you to this session to learn more about the CAMS Award that's sponsored by the Burroughs Wellcome Fund. Before we get too deep into things, wanted to provide some housekeeping information. As you will notice, you won't have video access, but you will be able to drop questions into the bottom of your screen where you can add your questions either anonymously or if you're okay using your name, that is fine too. We will answer them as they come in and during the Q&A session. There is an option to thumbs up a question so that we can make sure to know and recognize that multiple people have the same question, and that's another way that you can make sure that your questions are getting answered. And so both of those features are for your use throughout the webinar. And as I mentioned, we'll have a Q&A time at the end to answer as many questions as we can regarding the award or any pieces that you needed addressed that we maybe didn't quite cover. As I mentioned, this webinar will be recorded and posted on the BWF website. So if you aren't able to stay for the whole portion or would like to go back and rewatch, that will be a possibility. And there'll be one additional webinar that happens Tuesday, September 10th from 10 to 11:30 a.m. as well, Eastern Time. And if by chance there are very specific questions to your unique circumstances that we won't be able to address in this context, please feel free to reach out to us at the email listed in the top right, cams@bwfund.org, CAMS. And that will go to our entire team, who I'll introduce in a second, so that we can try and address your questions as you're preparing your application. So just to give you first an overview of what we'll be covering today, we'll take some time to provide some context about BWF and the award history. Then I'll transition into talking in more detail about the award itself, our timeline and eligibility criteria. Then we will move on to the actual application platform and the different components that you'll be assembling for the application. And then we'll get to what I'm sure most people will like to focus on, and that is the actual crafting of your application and providing some general guidelines around how to think about the different aspects that you'll be crafting. And then finally, at the end, we'll do Q&A, and I will share some closing remarks at the very, very end. So to begin, we'll cover some history about BWF and the award. And so for those who may be less familiar with Burroughs Wellcome Fund, our name does actually come from two individuals, namely Silas Burroughs and Henry Wellcome, who in the 1800s founded Burroughs Wellcome Company in the UK. They were US citizens and it started their pharmaceutical company actually in the UK and experienced a lot of growth. What they were focused on was actually encapsulating drugs in tablet form. And that bottom left picture is a image of some of the initial products that the company developed. And they obviously experienced a lot of boom and growth from their developments on the pharmaceutical side. And so in the 1950s, they decided to develop a philanthropic arm of the company. And so at the time, that was encapsulated within the company. And eventually, in the 1990s, they decided to split out the company aspect and the philanthropic activities. So eventually, the company aspect got bought out and is part of GlaxoSmithKline and other entities, but is not formally associated at this point with the fund as a nonprofit. And so the fund is responsible for North America. And since the company began in the UK, the Wellcome Trust, which is the same Wellcome, gave a $400 million gift for the initiation of the Burroughs Wellcome Fund, which is the organization that we are now, to become an independent nonprofit that supports North America, so US and Canada. And our mission is as follows, is to serve and strengthen society by nurturing a diverse group of leaders in biomedical sciences to improve human health through education, empowering discovery in frontiers of greatest need. Obviously, that is a huge mission with lots of arms and legs and pieces that we could pursue. And I'll talk a little bit in just a second about how we kind of hone that in to some specific focus areas. But with that endowment, it has grown over the years, and usually we're fluctuating somewhere between 750 million to upwards of 800 million when the market is good. And the way that we do this is by investing our endowment entirely in different money markets and have a great team of financial advisors who allow us to forego the fundraising aspect of things and just focus on giving as they continue to grow the endowment. And so what we do is make sure that we give about 5% of our total endowment worth annually. And so just at the bottom here is a snapshot of our giving guide that we post annually that you can find on the website about what we have been giving towards annually. In this past fiscal year that's closing for us at the end of this month, BWF has awarded just under $40 million in the past fiscal year, and we are excited to kick off the next fiscal year September 1. So a little bit more about how we, again, kind of hone in that broader mission of ours. So there are several different focus areas that Burroughs Wellcome Fund strategically gives in. The first that I'll mention that is the team that runs CAMS is the Biomedical and Reproductive Sciences portfolio. And myself and our team is the main ones guiding that. And then another area that we give in is science education and diversity in science, which is led by Alfred Mays. We have science communication and philanthropy, which is led by Russ Campbell and Manos Sekhan. And the additional areas are interfaces in science and regulatory sciences, which is led by Tammy Collins. And interfaces refers to those who may have more of a physical science background and are applying their knowledge and expertise to biological questions. And then the final area is infectious disease, career guidance, and climate change, which is managed by Victoria McGovern and her team. And so each of these focused areas are the ways that we kind of pare down that larger mission to ensure that we're giving strategically in designated areas. And that varies over time. As an example, climate change is a newer area that we have been giving in the last few years, which was originally not part of the formal process, but again, fluctuates over time. So as I mentioned, would like to introduce you to the Biomedical and Reproductive Sciences team. In addition to myself, Daniel Baroff, who is the program associate for the team, and then Lama Haidar, who is the program coordinator. We are your team that you will be interfacing with should you have questions about the different aspects of the application. And we are a small but mighty team, and we'll do our best to engage with you as best we can and in a timely manner as you're going throughout the process, and just wanted to make sure that you were aware of the team that is primarily facilitating this award. So as we're kind of stepping closer into CAMS, wanted to also give you some perspective about how our being BWF being our investment in physician scientists has evolved over time. So as I mentioned, in the early 90s is when BWF became a formal nonprofit that was able to start giving funds. And so as early as 1995, the initial career transition award that we had was the Career Awards for Biomedical Scientists, or we called it CABS for short, and that ran from 1995 to, 2006. And the main difference was still a transition award, still open to all disciplines. The main difference was that PhDs were also eligible to apply. And the majority of funds were still given to physician scientists. And ultimately, that program stopped as the introduction of K99 came in play, and we had some strategic planning changes that allowed us to transition to CAMS. And the other award that was also kind of running in parallel was actually targeted at physician scientists who were more mid-career. And that was an award called the Clinician Scientist Award in Translational Research, and ran from 97 to 2006. And as the name implied, focused on clinician scientists who were focused on translational research and providing travel funds and professional development funds to build collaborations between different institutions. And as I mentioned, we had a kind of strategic period where those programs were sunset, and we decided to focus exclusively on physician scientists in the form of the Career Awards for Medical Scientists, which is what the program is now. And that started in 2007 and is running currently with no intentions of deviating from there. The other program that some may or may not be aware of, depending on your institution, is that we had two competitive award cycles of a physician scientist institutional award program. And that initiative was focused on providing infrastructure at specific institutions that would develop physician scientists who chose to pursue research but did not pursue a PhD, and trying to provide infrastructure within those institutions to build up their opportunities for continuing their research at their institution. And those awards are still active, but we do not actively run cycles for that award. And in total, between these four different programs, we've invested over $250 million towards physician scientists. And hopefully that is an indication of the value that we see in you all as the future of discoveries and impacting health for going forward. And we aim to continue to do so, and we'll continue to revisit the best ways to do that, but are glad to be actively and over long periods of time investing in this population. So next, I'll move on to details about the actual CAMS award timeline and eligibility. So just to give you an overview, first, and most importantly, this is a portable award. And the goal is for these awards to support physician scientists as they transition to independence. It is a 5-year award that provides $700,000 for bridging from a postdoctoral type role into faculty. And we primarily focus on researchers that are focused on research questions that are basic or mechanistically driven research projects. We do have some interest in translational work, but our primary focus is the basic mechanism focused research projects. And then for this particular cycle, we are budgeted for 14 to 15 awards, and that usually varies based on where our endowment is. And since things are going well, we are glad to share the wealth and hopefully support an additional award or two. So to kind of talk in a little more detail around how this $700,000 can be used, I will say that the obvious split can be $140K per year given out, and the only limitations that we have are caps on how much can be applied to salary and fringe benefits for the PI, which we will talk through now. But I do want to note that the split does not have to be 140K per year. We do have some flexibility there and have worked with our finance team to ensure that this award is flexible enough to work with the needs of the awardee. So if you needed to spend more sooner, that's possible. And we also have no cost extensions that can be used should things change and there need to be some fluctuations. So should you opt for making use of the postdoctoral fellowship portion, this is not required, but you can use it. In year one, $90,000 could be used towards salary and fringe benefits, and that would be combined. So up to 10% of that 90,000 can be used towards fringe benefits, and the remainder to your salary. If you opted for an additional year, we would provide $95,000. Again, that would cover both salary and fringe benefits, with the 10% of that total to be used towards fringe, and the remainder to salary coverage. And then anything that you didn't end up using would be transferred and used and applied towards the faculty portion of the award should you need the postdoctoral portion. When we get to the faculty portion of things, as you will notice, the annual faculty portion is a lower salary allowance, and that is $59,500 annually towards the PI and your benefits combined. And the intent behind this is to ensure that you are building up your research team so that you can provide more time, energy, effort to building the lab as a whole. And there's no minimum amount of effort that you have to put towards the CAMS award, but in the ideal scenario, you are using less and less of this award towards your salary, but for building your research team. So to talk a little bit more, so in addition to the salary and fringe benefits, completely separate, there would be up to $5,000 a year that could be used towards caregiving expenses. And this benefit could be used in the postdoc and or faculty portion. Beyond that, of course, funds can be used towards lab personnel. And in this case, for the benefits and the salary of lab personnel, whether that be a technician, a graduate student, a postdoc, there are no caps on the salary that can be used and the benefits for those personnel. However, the only limitation to note is that the funds cannot be used towards tuition for trainees. So specifically graduate students or post-bac students, perhaps even undergrads, if you opted for that. Just note that is an additional limitation. Should your institution's salary and or fringe scales exceed what we're allowing annually provided, the expectation is that the institution would supplement the remaining. And again, just to remind you, there's not a minimum amount of the grant that has to be used towards salary, but it is an option, and we encourage you to kind of think through with the finance teams that you are partnered with about how best to allocate this. And I will make sure, and I will note that the how you budget, which we'll get to and on the back end, is not formally evaluated as you're applying. So make sure the numbers are right and they add up to 700,000, and that you've kind of had some discussion to figure out, how you'd like to allocate things. But we recognize things change. You get on the job market, maybe it takes a little bit longer than you expected, and that shifts things. And so we try not to prioritize that across the review process because we know things are regularly in flux. So get the numbers as best aligned as your understanding and plans go, and then leave that there. And I would say focus the rest of your time and energy on the actual application process. And again, I guess to emphasize the fact that we intend to be flexible around the needs of awardees. Should you receive the award and these limits prohibit you in some way, we will consider exceptions on a case-by-case basis. So the other aspects of funding your research group that you can use these funds towards is lab equipment and supplies, group outings for building camaraderie for your team. All of those things are within the bounds of this award, and they can also be used towards professional development activities. As it relates to both of those areas, the only thing that we ask of awardees is that should their plans for equipment and or travel costs exceed 20,000 and 80,000 respectively, that they be in touch with us to talk through the current circumstances that have brought that about, and just making sure that we're aware of those larger purchases in a certain year. And then finally, the only or a limitation is that there are no indirect costs that can be charged against this grant. Okay, so to get into the actual timeline of this application process, the application portal is live and began in July. And we do not have a letter of intent phase. We have just the full application. And so that full application will be due October 8th. And after that, the advisory committee will review applications, and we will invite a subset of the full applicants to interview. And those dates are already set for March 21st and 22nd of 2025. And then from there, a subset of the finalists will be selected for the award, which will be announced in June of 2025. And we would make arrangements for first payments to go out in September of 2025. So before you dive deep into putting your application together, a obviously key piece is making sure that you are eligible. And so we will walk through some of these, and the first being that citizens, non-citizens, permanent residents, temporary residents who are legally qualified to work in the U.S. are all eligible. The U.S. or Canada are eligible. And the key here is holding a clinical degree, MD, DDS, DVM, VMD, DO degree. All of these are eligible clinical degrees that you can hold. you can hold these in combination with other degrees. The key is just holding at least one of these for eligibility. In addition to that, if you happen to still be in clinical training, whether that be residency or fellowship, fellowship is not required, but should you opt to do so, you need to be board eligible by the award start date, which would be September of 2025. So be mindful of that as you are kind of timing out the rest of your training phase. And that is kind of the rule of thumb as it relates to finishing up clinical training as you're applying for this award. Something new that has more recently been put in place, actually across BWF, is that you are no longer required to go through a degree granting institution to apply. We have updated our standards such that public or private nonprofit organizations that have a 501c3 or equivalent status in the US or Canada. This includes degree granting institutions, but could be a research institute or a teaching hospital that's affiliated with an academic institution. All of these are eligible to receive BWF funds. And so hopefully that can streamline a bit for some that are in some of these research institutes or teaching hospitals, the process to go through grants officers that are at that actual institute rather than just a degree granting institution. And another eligibility criteria is around the amount of effort that is expected for research. And our current standard is that you have to have at least 75% of your overall effort be related to research-related activities. There is not an explicit minimum percent that you have to spend on the CAMS award, because again, we hope that you will use these funds to build your team. But the again, emphasis is on being able to have dedicated research time to the tune of 75% of your time. As it relates to your actual position and title, we know that this looks very different across various institutions. And so should you be kind of in that in-between phase where you have finished your training but have not taken on a tenure track position, you are eligible. You can be a lecturer, instructor, assistant professor, non-tenure track. All of these are acceptable titles for candidates, so long as you can demonstrate that you have not accepted or signed a tenure track offer during the award application period. Should you be a kind of in that in-between phase and received an institutional startup package, that is something that we can consider for eligibility. And that is something that's considered on a case-by-case basis. If you have received some amount of institutional funds when taking your current position, you can reach out and share your full offer letter to cams@bwfund.org for review. Usually it takes us a little less than a week to look that over, and it's usually a lot easier if you send the offer letter in your note. You can redact any salary pieces or aspects that you would prefer to keep to yourself. The main piece is that we are able to see the details of your offer as it relates to the actual startup package. Beyond that, the main restrictions that I need to make sure to note are that at the time of applications, candidates cannot hold or have accepted in writing or verbally a faculty appointment as a tenure track assistant professor. So up until October 8th, that day, No. Should you work with your department and have an offer letter in hand and sign it on October 9th? More power to you and congratulations. We just need to make sure that it is after the actual application period, has closed. And the other portion to mention is that should you have additional funding, the only restrictions are an R01, an NIH K99, or an NIH DP5 award. Those three awards cannot be held concurrently with the CAMS award. And so if you apply to those at the same time, that is fine. Just note that you will need to choose one or the other should you be selected for both. And then again, finally, the substantial, if it is deemed that you have a substantial startup package, those candidates too would be considered ineligible. All right, now we'll go ahead and move on to the actual application platform and the different components of the application. So in the last few years, we have transitioned to use a platform called Proposal Central, which you may be familiar with, as there are several other foundations who are also making use of this platform, and hopefully can be of benefit to you creating a profile. To the right is a screenshot of the Proposal Central website, which you can access the application from, as first making sure that you are clicking on the applicant or awardee tab, and then you can either use your ORCID ID or create a username and password. If you already have a username and password and can get in, you should be able to navigate to the CAMS award that way as well. If you are new to Proposal Central, the other way to access the application is actually by going to the BWF website. And if you click on Begin a Proposal, it will take you directly to the Proposal Central website where you can proceed with, again, creating a username or password. A nice addition that has come with us using the Proposal Central platform is that should you have issues with accessing your application, submitting it, something's missing, any of these types of things, Altum and the Proposal Central help desk are available during business hours, Monday through Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern time. And the numbers are listed on the screen, and you can also email them. And they are aware of this application cycle and likely will not be or be chasing a lot of different things at the very end of the process. So wouldn't advise waiting to the last minute to finish things off, but will be available throughout the application period should you come up with any challenges as it relates to actually the application portal as a whole. So next, we can go ahead and get into the actual components of the application. So there's a lot of pieces here, and I'll comment on them briefly, but know that we'll dive a bit deeper into kind of these key elements in just a bit. There's going to be a title page, a space or an area where you can enable other users to access the proposal, and you're entering your applicant information and demographics. There will be a space where you need to include the nominating institution and the contacts for that, and also a space for entering any mentors or sponsors that you plan to get letters from. There will be a space for you to enter their information so that they can receive the details for uploading that in the appropriate place as well. You will be asked for an abstract and lay summary, as well as a personal and career statement, budget and budget justification, which we kind of touched on a little bit already, as well as a space for uploading your publications and your research plan and attachments. To the right is what you will see on the left-hand side of the screen within Proposal Central once you are inside of the application, to kind of walk you through the different sections that are there. And you should be able to click on the different sections to maneuver to the portion that you're wanting to update as you go throughout the process of putting your application together, so that you can navigate hopefully relatively easily. And so from here, we'll go ahead and get into kind of the meat and potatoes of putting your application together. And I'm going to start by just bringing up who you should have involved in your application process. And I'm going to say get them involved early and keep them involved often as you're preparing your application. You obviously will be the central person in all of this and be coordinating all the different aspects in terms of getting them into Proposal Central and making sure that they have access to the portions that they need. The BWF and the Proposal Central teams will be here for backup regarding different questions that may arise, whether that be eligibility or different aspects that are related to what is actually going into a certain component. You could reach out to BWF and then Proposal Central for all the technical aspects of things. Involving your research mentors, collaborators who may be letter writers would be important to have involved, both with the letter aspect, but also developing the proposal and getting feedback as you continue to refine it would be important individuals to have involved. And then finally, and probably maybe underappreciated, is the signing official at your organization who will need to certify your eligibility, be the person to certify that the institution approves of your submission and that your institution is eligible, and provide the relevant documents there. I would say sooner rather than later, reach out and figure out who that person needs to be for you and what their timeline is relative to the submission date that you have in mind, and make sure that they know that you're applying and that you have the tools that you need to make sure that you can get that in a timely process. Can't tell you the number of stories that come up the day or two before because someone didn't realize that it would take the institution signing officials a week and they only have 2 days left, etc. You don't want to be that person. You don't need that stress. No one needs that stress. So please figure out who that person is and make sure that you're having conversations with them to update them along the way so that you can stay on top of when things need to be submitted and not be trying to figure out things last minute. And then just to dive a little bit deeper into the letter of recommendations, I wanted to provide you a few examples of the types of individuals that previous awardees have included as their letter writers. It does not have to be all of these people because obviously there's only 4, but making sure that you have 4 people that can provide great context in terms of the full scope of who you are and what you're contributing in your science is essential. So folks have previously included a chief of their division, a department chair, a lab mentor if you happen to be in a very, very large lab and was primarily being taught by a postdoc is an example. Your graduate school advisor, should you have pursued a PhD, a postdoc or fellowship advisor is another person that you could have be your letter writer. Additionally, we have seen people include and get letters from the director of their residency or fellowship program, Also chosen mentors in their field and specialty. So they didn't work with them directly, but had a long-standing mentoring relationship with an individual and asked them to be a letter writer is another possibility as well. Research collaborators are also good potential sources of letters of support. And then, of course, thesis committee members or chairs are also individuals that you can consider for writing one of your 4 letters of recommendation. And again, the reason I have these kind of tied together is the more cohesion that you can have between what you're writing and what these letter writers are writing, the better. And so again, getting them involved early and often throughout your process will be to your benefit. So next, I wanted to make sure that you had a picture of who will actually be reviewing these applications. Every year, we have an advisory committee who comes together to review applications. And what you will see is that all of them are physician scientists. They have a variety of training backgrounds. And they also have a variety of disciplines that they represent, considering the fact that CAMS is open to any and all disciplines. So we try to get as wide a breadth as possible. We don't usually have everything, but usually the majority of things we can find at least 2 to 3 individuals to review each application so that candidates have people who have lived experience in being physician scientists reviewing their applications. There will be a few additional members that we add to make sure that we are covering a few folks who have rotated off. Usually this committee is relatively stable over time. Usually 2 or 3 will rotate off every few years as they come to the end of their service. But this is the group of individuals, again, a wide variety of disciplines. So keep that in mind when we're thinking about jargon, et cetera, particularly in your research plan. And again, just highlighting that these are also physician scientists, so they have some familiarity in what the kind of transition you are headed towards. And then next, wanted to share the review criteria. So there are 3 areas that you will be reviewed regarding. First is the project plan, and then you as an investigator, and then finally the impact of you as an individual on the larger BWF CAMS community. The project plan and the investigator are the highest weighted sections, but that is not to say that we neglect consideration of how you might contribute to the larger community. So when we talk about the project plan, the emphasis is on innovation and the appropriateness of the methods that you're selecting, the significance of the questions that you're asking, as well as the impact that it can have on the broader field that you're in. The creativity and originality of the types of approaches that you're taking are all pieces that are considered as it relates to the project plan. When it comes to you as an investigator, they are looking for what type of experience you have to actually move this project forward, experience as well as expertise to move this project forward. In addition, the potential of you establishing your independence based on the career development plan that you are putting forward is a large piece that is being considered. Your publication history is one way to have a mark or a evidence of your commitment to the field, as well as just further validation of your expertise and experience in the field. And then, of course, your reference letters matching up with your plans and your statements of what you're doing and where you're trying to go. And demonstration of your leadership in the science, as well as just general leadership skills, are also being considered. And then as it relates to your impact on the community, what we are hoping to add to our community is impactful and unique voices that help build both the community at individual research institutions, but also again, the broader community of BWF scholars. And that can be both personal qualities as well as the types of research that you're bringing forward. And having someone who is willing to be collegial and collaborative is certainly a positive aspect as well. Okay. I'm going to move on to talking a little bit about the personal statement. And the way that I'm going to frame this is below are some general questions that you could be asking yourself about. And you don't have to address each of these, but they are ways to think about what you might include in your personal statement. So you could share about what your motivations are for this chosen career or research area. You could focus more on who you are and what you prioritize outside of science and medicine. And if you have thoughts about how those connect or influence how you approach your research, you could incorporate that. If you have hobbies or interests that you wanted to share, or family members or lived experiences that you find to be foundational to how you approach your work and your life, those things can be shared as well. And an additional question that you might consider is what perspectives or personal traits that you've noticed about yourself that make you unique or different from your colleagues. Again, you don't have to ask or address all of these, but it is important to make sure that you share some piece of who you are. And again, if you prefer not to share your personal side, focusing on your motivations and your career choices and the unique things that you think you bring to your field, that's perfectly fine. But finding some aspect or way to show the person side is what you're trying to emphasize with the personal statement. As it relates to the career development plan, this is a new section that we've added to provide more space for candidates to be able to share more context around their current plans and transition plans. So again, I'm framing this as it relates to these are questions that you can ask yourself that may be useful in terms of incorporating them into your career development plan. So to kind of dive in here, what are your future career goals based on your current skill set? Are you prepared? And how does this prepare you for accomplishing these goals? If there are additional skills or tools that you think are gaps, do you have the right team to help you assist in that process? Beyond that, if you are planning to remain at your current institution, what is your transition plan? And again, particularly if you're planning on staying at the same institution, then having some more in-depth discussion and clarification about how you plan to distinguish your lab from your current or previous mentors becomes especially critical, and taking more space to do that in detail would be an important aspect if you are planning on remaining at your current institution. If you plan on doing a national faculty search, you don't necessarily have to talk in detail about which institutions you'll be applying to, and we won't hold you to those if those change for any reason. But the things that you can be thinking about emphasizing or talking through is what your priorities will be regarding the types of institutions that you'll be looking for, the types of research infrastructure and departmental environment that you'd be looking for that you think would be complementary for your growth as well as the growth of your lab, and would again be complementary to the skill set that you're already bringing. And then finally, another question or questions to consider is, how does the project plan that you're putting forth in the CAMS application, how does that fit the broader plans or the scope of the research group that you plan on building? And based on that scope, where would you think collaborators would make more sense versus building those skills within your research group? All of those things are, excuse me, aspects that you can cover in your career development plan. And then finally, the piece that is usually the one that goes through the most edits, I'm sure, is the research plan. And what I'll note off the bat is that the CAMS award has a track record and of prioritizing research projects that are high risk and high reward. And we usually in the discussions are actively talking about whether the work that is being put forward in the application is actually fundable by other mechanisms. And so usually the ones that we would see as potentially fundable by other mechanisms, we deprioritize. So you can think of this application as a way to kind of aim at thinking a little bit outside of the box and kind of shooting for project ideas that have the maximum amount of impact on your field. And that kind of goes into this next part of what thinking about questions that you can ask that would bring either new approaches to your chosen field or ask the same questions in a very different way. And that could be through new techniques or perhaps a new hypothesis. And that can be paradigm shifting or just, again, a different way of looking at some of the kind of age-old questions in your field. Beyond that, of course, are making sure that the methods that you're putting forth are appropriate and actually addressing the questions that you're asking, and making sure that you address and talk through or at least provide some level of insight into what limitations you recognize as with your chosen methods, as well as the pitfalls and how you might be able to address those and provide additional experiments to ensure that the conclusions that you're making are sound. Beyond that, making sure that you can demonstrate, or another question is making sure that you can demonstrate that you have the appropriate training and experience in your field and the tools and techniques that are being used. Making sure that those are appropriate. And if you are newer to a field, making sure that you have, again, a team around you in place that can help you grow in this area. If you are planning on using new tools or new techniques and developing those as a part of your research plan, that is welcome, but make sure that you can justify and make a sound argument for how those tools will actually help answer a biologically relevant question. And then beyond that, the final thing to note is that extensive preliminary data is not required. And the main rule of thumb here is that whatever data that you provide, you should be sure that it is a solid basis or foundation to justify the line of questioning, the questions that you're asking, and or provide a proof of concept if you're introducing a new technique and its viability as a tool for answering, again, those biologically relevant questions. And because the research plan is so critical and it's kind of a challenge to make sure that you're kind of aiming in the right direction. Wanted to share a few paraphrased comments from both candidates who went on to interview as well as candidates who did not go on to interview, so that hopefully you can have a little bit more context around how to think about assembling your application. So this first comment here, very good preliminary data, very mechanistic, not as far along in terms of their research, but a good mentorship group. So it's a very, and they commented that it was a very strong grant. And again, that went on to interview. So again, even if you are earlier in your field, making sure you have the right team in place can go a long way in making sure that the committee feels like you have what you need to make the successful transition. The second comment here, solid publication record, like the model system a lot. They are in an environment where they can do this work, and there's not a lot of people doing it. And again, I would say that harkens back to the idea of, again, making sure that you're in the right environment or selecting the right environment, as well as doing and asking questions that aren't kind of hopping on the bandwagon and doing the most popular research topics, but the topics that are really going to shake things up for a given field. And then finally, the last piece is great preliminary data and incredibly productive investigator. Again, being able to demonstrate that you have been in the field, been publishing, goes a long way in making in providing the reviewers confidence in your ability to transition to independence. And so to provide the converse of that, I'll share a few comments regarding candidates who were declined for an interview, so that you have a sense of some sticky points. And so this first comment, preliminary data is not very robust and would want to see the premise verified better. One aim seems to be phishing and is using a bit of circular logic, and then the final aim is not very well developed. And so again, I think taking your time and making sure that you have others vetting your work and making sure that you are not developing your research plan in isolation becomes very, very critical, as well as getting feedback on the basis of the kind of the work and justification that you're putting forward. The second comment, good grant, like the model, but it doesn't go beyond omics. Would like to see some, sorry, that should be tie back to patients or addressing biological questions. And this, again, harkens back to the idea of not using a tool in the name of using a tool, but it really is tied back to a biologically relevant question. And then finally, the final comment from a reviewer from a declined candidate is, it's an interesting question overall, but one aim is not well supported, and they are early without a strong track record, and so maybe they should reapply. And I added this one in here to say and make sure that I make reference to the fact that we do allow candidates to apply more than once, and so sometimes it really is about not having just enough data to be able to be convincing to the reviewers, and that's not a knock, but is an opportunity to continue, again, growing and thinking about your science, and reapplying is definitely something that can and should be done. We do have certainly a number of awardees who have applied once or maybe even twice. And so I'll stop there and kind of round off with the applicant pool. So there are this data here, the x-axis is the number of applicants, and we have 5 years of data. And as you can see, we're consistently above 100 applications per year. And then usually we will have Our max has been 26 candidates who go on to interview. And usually, as you may have already tracked, it's usually about double the number of applicants to interview than we have awards to give. And so obviously that smaller number there is the actual number of awards that were given that cycle. So this is obviously a very competitive process, and usually we're somewhere between 10 and 15% success rate. And that is my kind of main line is usually it is not about the quality of the candidates and usually more about splitting hairs to make sure that we can fit within our confined budget. And this is where I, again, recommend applying. And if you're not successful, reapplying should you still be in the eligibility window. I did have one more piece, and I won't read all of this, but there are benefits that I think are best stated by the actual awardees of applying and receiving this award. This comment on the left is focused primarily about being able to hire individuals early in their career so that they could have more hands in the lab, being able to push projects forward. And that was kind of what they found to be most beneficial about the CAMS award. This top middle one is a more seasoned CAMS awardee that was one of the first few won the award in one of the first few cycles. And what they emphasized was the fact that the award allowed them to ask some riskier questions at the beginning of their career, which allowed for a lot of leeway in building up their group and being successful over the course of their career. So that is another benefit that has been mentioned. And then finally, this middle bottom quote is focused a little bit more on being able to actually leverage the funding from the CAMS award to get offers. Initially, they had gone on the job market earlier and were not successful. And once they got their CAMS award, all of a sudden they got offers. And of course, funding begets funding, and everybody wants to have folks with a few dollars is of course attractive. And so there are a lot of different benefits to the CAMS award. And these are just to highlight a few. And we have 214 CAMS awardees to date, and we hope that you will plan to apply and be added to that number.